So think with me. If all we had were one or the other of these two stories, what would that mean for our faith? What if Genesis 18 were it? From heaven, God hears of the great and horrid sinfulness of Sodom and Gomorrah, and accompanied by a small host of angels, God goes down to see whether indeed things have gotten so bad. Along the way, God and the angels meet Abraham, and Abraham sets off with them, but they do not make it far together. The angels go on ahead to Sodom, but as the scriptures put it rather evocatively, Abraham remains standing before God. Abraham remains standing. That says it all. We see Abraham standing and obstructing God's path. And in another sense, as the story unfolds, we see Abraham standing and obstructing God's plan. In the verse immediately following, what we heard read as Abraham came near, that could as well be translated, and Abraham stepped forward. The Hebrew verb is most often used of one who is about to make a formal legal complaint before magistrates, and it has an assertive and forceful aspect. So Abraham stands firm and he steps forward. He confronts God. He challenges God. He argues his case. If Sodom does prove to be in the grip of evildoers and deserving of punishment as God suspects, but even so, has at least 50 good people living in it, the city must be spared. Now, Abraham does not yet permit God to speak. God is, for now, reduced to silence. And Abraham continues on. Okay, suppose 50 good people should be found in Sodom. How could God allow them to suffer punishment? How could God allow terrible harm to befall the innocent? 50 good people. How could God allow the righteous to perish along with the wicked? This would be unjust. Far be that from you. Far be that from you. Abraham twice says to God, shall not the God who demands justice do justice? God agrees. God agrees that for the sake of 50 good people, all the city shall be pardoned. But Abraham is only just beginning here, and he presses his argument. If only 45 good people should be found in Sodom, well, what then? 45 good people are no less deserving of true justice than 50. What are 5 among friends? They too are worth saving. And again, God agrees. And again, God agrees as Abraham talks God down to 45 and then to 40 and then to 30 and then to 20 and then to 10. God agrees to relent in punishing Sodom for the sake of 10 good people. So what would it mean for our faith if Genesis 18, this first story, were it? In this story, Abraham trusts in his own moral reasoning more than he does in the hidden and inscrutable providence of God. Abraham demands that the purposes which God acts upon, that they be transparent to human logic, and that they track the limits of his and of our powers of understanding. As Abraham sees it, something is not good and just simply because God is God and God wills it. Something is good and just if and only if it comports with what he and what we believe that goodness and justice mean. God has no special prerogatives, and God must act within the same strictures of right and wrong as all the rest of us. For God is not beyond or above the moral order. Rather, God is the very ground of it. In this story, God is wrong. And in that, God is accountable to Abraham, not Abraham to God. God must answer to Abraham. God must answer to us. God must explain to Abraham what seems in his mind to defy explanation. How a just God could allow the innocent and undeserving to suffer unjustly. God must explain to us what seems so often in our minds to defy explanation. How a just God could allow the innocent and undeserving to suffer unjustly. This is a startlingly high view of the human person. Abraham's and our intelligence and moral intuitions are portrayed as on par with God's. Abraham knows, if not better than God, he knows at least as well as God what justice and goodness look like. God's omniscience and God's omnipotence, that is, God's all-knowingness and God's all-powerfulness, these are radically checked. Abraham's and our insistence and persistence can bend the will of God. And God just goes along with this. But what if Genesis 22, what if the second story were it? In this other story, God comes to Abraham and tests him. And that one word, tests, it signals to us that Abraham and God do not stand on the same plane of being. God can and God does intervene in the world and in human lives through whatever happenings God ordains and to whatever end God desires. God contrives circumstances in which to try Abraham. And however Abraham responds to God's testing, whether he proves faithful or not, there is still exposure to and no protection against the testing itself. Abraham is vulnerable before God. We are vulnerable before God. At any time, God can come and stand between Abraham and the future he dreams for himself. At any time, God can come and stand between us and the future we dream for ourselves. And God does come to Abraham and stand before him and test him. God commands Abraham to take his son Isaac, to bind him, to slay him, and to burn him, to sacrifice him. And now it is Abraham who is reduced to silence. So unthinkably monstrous is God's decree that Abraham is rendered speechless. Abraham does not protest or bargain or argue back or plead. Abraham does what God demanded. He does it in trance-like, unquestioning obedience. Isaac is tied and on the pyre, and Abraham lifts his knife in an act of terrible, fearsome submission to the will of God. An angel appears just before Abraham lets the blade fall, and the boy lives. But Abraham's willingness to do it, Abraham's willingness to do as commanded, no matter the madness, no matter the agony, no matter the cost of it, this is blessed by God and commended to us all throughout the Scriptures. So what would it mean for our faith if Genesis 22, if this second story were it? In this story, God is utterly beyond Abraham's and beyond our understanding. Why God wills what God wills and commands what God commands is not a question that Abraham dares to ask, and no doubt it is not one that God would deign to answer. For God does not persuade or reason with or entice Abraham, but God almost speaks Abraham's obedience forcibly into being, speaks with such terrifying, grave, and awesome command that Abraham could not but tremble and submit. God's word calls forth a response from what is essentially the nothingness of Abraham's own will, in the same way that God's word called forth creation from the nothingness of eternity past. So mindlessly and almost irresistibly in this story is Abraham carried along by the power of God's command. The message is clear. God is God, and Abraham is not. God is God, and we are not. God is God and is sovereign over all of us and over all things, including the kind of kindergarten-ish moral conventions and laws that govern our lives. God is not bound by and cannot be bound by the strictures of right and wrong as we lesser mortals are given to understand them. For then these would be above God. These would be God over God. And only God is God. So God can ask anything of us and do anything to us. And because God is the one asking it or doing it, it would be good and just. But of course, we do not have only one or the other of these two stories, and we need not choose between them. I would contend that we must not choose between them, and that maybe it is wrong even to ever read one without the other. Both of these stories are vividly mythological in how they speak of God, and obviously should not be taken literally. This would be, in the one instance, absurd, and in the other, abhorrent. But neither should they be taken lightly. I believe these two stories mark off the poles, the extremes of what a life of faith looks like. When in our thinking or in our practice of the faith, we move too far in the direction of either one of them, our thinking or our practice of the faith is diminished and frustrated. When we move too far in the direction of the first story, of Genesis 18, as Professor John Levinson from over at Harvard has put it, what we're left with is a religion in which God ceases to be a reality. A religion in which the human conscience has filtered out all divine directives that offend it and produced a God that is only itself writ large. What we're worshiping is our own thinking and values, right? What we're worshiping then is our own selves. And this is idolatry. But when we move too far in the other direction, in the direction of the second story of Genesis 22, what we're left with is fanaticism, with a religion of cruel and dangerous zealotry in which God is so incomprehensible to us that praising God as wise or just is meaningless, and obedience is slavery. But the sensibilities of these two stories, taken together, they protect a vital spiritual tension. Faith is shaking your fist in God's face and is praying, "Not my will, but yours be done." Faith is standing proud and worthy before God and is falling on your face in lowliness and awe. Faith is questioning and doubting, and faith is deep, childlike believing. Faith is honoring human reason and human feeling, and is humbly acknowledging how small and finite we are. Faith is being a little lower than the angels and being but the servants and handmaidens of the Lord. Faith is protesting and is submitted. Faith is arguing with God and obeying God. May it be so.